So what's this all about, Yuzu? Yuzu ran her tongue over her dry lips, her hands pressed tightly into her lap. It was a little cramped inside her room with all these people, but she wasn't sure where else they could conceivably talk without either people noticing or a nun or another student overhearing them. The nuns rarely checked the dorms, and only if it was late at night and they were trying to make sure everyone was in their beds. During the middle of the day, this was the safest place she could think of to hold a meeting. Masumi perched on top of Yuzu's pillow, awkwardly crunched into the corner. Selena and Ruri had taken the other bed, and Hokuto leaned against the door, with Yaiba on the floor next to him, and Yuzu perched on the end of her own bed. It seemed like it had been years since Yuzu had witnessed the strange confrontation in the sanctuary, but it had only been a day of thinking and overthinking, the words on her tongue every time one of the others passed her on the campus to one of their classes, wondering if she should say anything at all. After all, this was the Abbess they were talking about, right? They should trust her, shouldn't they? But testing? What did that mean? What was happening with Rin? She swallowed, feeling the entire room's eyes on her. I overheard something weird yesterday, she said. From who? Hokuto asked. From the abbess and one of the high priestesses. They were talking in the sanctuary yesterday morning. Selena let out a low whistle. And you were spying on them, she said. She gave Yuzu a thumbs up that Yuzu wasn't sure she wanted, and Yuzu just rolled her eyes. Listen, she said. They said some things. I'm worried about Rin. It sounded like they were doing something to her. She's in solitary, Yaiba said. So yeah, they're doing something to her. They're putting her in solitary. It sounded like more than that. It sounded like they've been doing something to everyone they put in solitary. Something about testing. Ruri's face scrunched up with worry, but Selena just leaned back on her hands. Yuzu, we've all been in solitary before, she said. I haven't, said Yuzu. Okay, everyone who's cool has been in solitary before, said Selena. Nothing happens. You just sit in a little room with a votary of the goddess, and you have to pray a lot and think about what you've done. Mostly, you just sleep. Can confirm, Hokuto said. Yeah, said Masumi. That's about it. It's not freaky or anything. It's just boring. Yuzu's hands tightened in her lap. No, that didn't seem right. That didn't make any sense. Where is the solitary cell, she said. If I can just have a peek and see that Rin's there just bored out of her mind, then I'll be satisfied. Masumi's mouth opened, and then it closed again. She furrowed her brow. Yuzu's heart clenched. What kind of expression was that? It's, well, of course we don't know, because otherwise people would spring their friends out or go bother them or something, right? But you've been there, Yuzu said, feeling a flutter of unease. Why don't you know how to get there? She swung her eyes to Selena next, and then to Hokuto and Yaiba. All of them looked uncomfortable all of a sudden. Their eyes wouldn't meet Yuzu's, mostly staring off into space or at the floor, brows furrowing and lips parting in thought. What kind of a response was this? Do they blindfold you when they take you? Yuzu said. That seems a little much, doesn't it? And why wouldn't you remember if that happened? Her heart thumped in her chest. What was this? They didn't even know where it was? That's... Yaiba started. None of us know, Hokuto said, his voice flat. We have no idea. Yuzu's hands clenched in her lap. Then, why? The room fell silent. Then Masumi swore softly in another language, and Yuzu felt a cold running through her. What are they doing to Rin, she said. And what have they been doing to all the students who have to spend time in solitary meditation? Selena looked like she was going to throw up, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. They fucked with our memories? Is that what you're saying? She said, her voice trembling. I don't know what I'm saying, Yuzu said. She hugged herself, trying to put some pressure on her arms to ward off the sudden chill. But I think something is wrong. I think the high priestesses are trying to do something, and I don't know what. Masumi leaned forward, her eyes glittering, hard and angry. What else did you hear them talking about? She said. Yuzu hesitated. She thought it over again. The events of that morning had been burned in her brain, and as she thought it and rethought it over and over again. They seemed scared, she said. They said something was wrong with the calendars. They didn't know when the eclipse was coming. And they said that the demon was moving. Moving? Ruri echoed, sounding distant and dizzy. That was what Mieru said. Mieru was there, said Hokuto, pushing off the door to stand upright, his arms folded so tightly that he looked like he was going to crush himself. Yuzu nodded. I think something's wrong with her, she said. Something's always been wrong with her, said Yaiba, resting his head on his hand, elbow on his crossed legs. She's kind of a bitch. Won't even say hello. Probably got a big head after the abbess made her, like, her personal servant or something. Yuzu shook her head, feeling cold again. I don't think she can say hello. Himika and the other priestess were asking her questions, and she had trouble talking. They were asking her to scry, I think. She can scry? Said Masumi, eyes widening. Is that her blessing or something? I don't know, said Yuzu, but something was wrong with her. It was like she wasn't all there, like she was struggling just to be human. She felt so cold. She wanted to crumple up on herself and disappear. What was going on in this place? And why were the abbess and the priestesses being so secretive? What was happening to Rin? The piece of Reglan was crumbling right under her fingers, and she didn't know what to do about it. Masumi's hand gripped her shoulder. It was steadying, her hand warm against Yuzu's skin, and she tried to breathe. I don't know, she said again, but I'm scared. I think something's wrong here. I think they're hiding something from us, and I don't even know what it is. They said they were looking for a weapon, but I don't know what that means. Is that the goddess sword or something else? She choked on her words. She had to put one hand over her mouth and squeeze her eyes shut. Oh, goddess, she was so scared. She had no idea what was happening. A cool hand fell on top of hers in her lap, and she opened her eyes to see Ruri. Ruri smiled at her, squeezing her hand between hers and bringing her fingers briefly to her lips. Yuzu, she said. It's okay. You're not alone, all right? She cupped Yuzu's face and held it briefly. We're all together now, she said, soothing. I'm glad you came to us, to talk to us about what happened. We're all going to work together, okay? Yeah, Hokuto said, grinning. You've got us now. More importantly, you have me. Yeah, okay, make sure your head doesn't fall off with all that swelling, Masumi said, rolling her eyes. You're not going to have to investigate this by yourself, Selena said, standing up and folding her arms. We're a team. We always have been. You got it? Yuzu blinked back tears. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked. We should push back leaving, Masumi said, looking up at Hokuto. Especially if it sounds like Mieru has the power to scry. She could find us as soon as we leave. Hokuto nodded. We'll need some new plans then, he said. For now, let's focus on researching things around here. I'll start poking around and seeing what areas are normally off limits. See if I can catch anything of Rin. I'll help, Selena said. Yaiba and I can start sneaking into the restricted parts of the library and see what's there that they don't want us to see, Masumi said. Yuzu, Ruri, maybe the two of you can see if you can corner Mieru. Sounds like she might have the most information. Yuzu remembered the harsh, strange voice that tumbled out of Mieru's lips and shuddered. But no, Masumi was right. Mieru was probably their best bet to finding out what the abbess and the priestesses were up to. That would be hard, though, because Mieru was always around the abbess. You two are the only ones in our group who have never gotten in trouble. They're less likely to think you're up to something if you start hanging around Mieru. It made sense, Yuzu thought with a grimace. Ruri just nodded. That works with me, she said. Yuzu, are you going to be okay? Yuzu swallowed thickly. She thought, again, of her father, of the boy she had given the flowers to, about how she wanted to be someone who could protect this world and the smiles of everyone in it. And now it seemed as she couldn't even trust her own order to do that. She had to do something about it. She lifted her eyes and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered to the room. "Let's do it." Mieru was always with the abbess and rarely ran messages for her, so they would have to wait a bit before either of them appeared. Yuzu was all right with that. Gave her a few moments to retreat to the shrine, to catch her breath. I don't know anything at all. Everything was much more complicated than she'd first thought. Even this order, which was made to worship the goddess and protect the world, it had secrets. Secrets that made Yuzu's heart clench up just knowing that they were there, and she had no idea what they meant for her friends, for the world. "Goddess, are you there? Is this what you wanted from me? Was that why you sent me to listen in on what they said? Do you want me to investigate your own order?" There was, of course, no answer. Yuzu didn't expect one either. It just felt somewhat calming to pretend, at least, like she was talking to the goddess. She made her way through the brush toward the shrine clearing. She could sit there and pray for a while, get her head on straight before she moved on to the next phase of their plan, to find and corner Mieru and try to talk to her. She was so lost in thought that she did not see the lumpy shadow sitting in front of the shrine until she had already walked out into the clearing, and it had already turned towards her. Yuzu yelped in spite of herself. She leaped back, both hands out. She could make a distraction with some flowers growing rapidly in a pinch. "Whoa there," the woman said, a faint smile the only thing Yuzu could see under her cowl. "I'm unharmed, see?" She raised both hands. She was still sitting, cross-legged, her cloak pulled around her on the ground. This time, Yuzu could see the clothing underneath the cloak. It was simple traveling clothes, a short, long-sleeved white tunic with a purple vest, a few belts slung over both shoulders to the one around her waist with various pouches and bags hanging from it. Sturdy, practical brown pants that were tacked into her calf-high, laced-up boots. "It's you again," Yuzu said. "Where do you keep coming from?" "I'm usually just around here, or in the Pilgrim's Inn back at the village." "But you just keep disappearing every time I look away." The woman frowned. "Do I? I apologize. That's very rude, isn't it?" She stood up again, making Yuzu jump. But all she did was lean down to dust off her pants, and then straighten, her cloak falling over her clothing again. "Who are you?" Yuzu asked. The woman seemed to think about it for a long time, actually putting one finger to her lips as though this were a difficult question to answer. "N," she said. "Your name is N?" Yuzu said. "Not really, but it's what I currently go by." Yuzu blinked. "That's not really an answer." "Well, sometimes names change. It happens when you've been around for long enough." She didn't make much sense at all, did she? In spite of herself, though, Yuzu felt like she was relaxing, her arms dropping slowly back to her sides. "You must be really devout to have come all this way and found us," she said, "and then stayed so long." Pilgrims never stayed much longer than a day or so, just long enough to say their offerings at the sanctuary and leave. There wasn't much time in life to stay for long, and the nuns didn't like having outsiders here. And she simply shrugged. "I don't think I'd call it devotion as much as curiosity." Yuzu blinked. This woman liked to make every response cryptic, didn't she? Yuzu felt like she should be more nervous and worried, especially after the last encounter with the woman, but for some reason she just didn't. Maybe it was because she was already tired and worried from her other problems. She didn't have the time or space to worry about anything else. "Curiosity? I like to collect stories, see? About the goddess and the demon." Yuzu's lips parted. "Are you a story singer?" she said, trying to hide the murmur of excitement in her voice. She'd only ever met one, a sweet, laughing young woman with her chestnut hair cut close around her fair face, blue eyes light as she danced around with her violin and sang stories. She hadn't been able to stay here for long, as the nuns had asked her to leave, but the music haunted Yuzu still, sometimes in her sleep. "I would be if I could play any instruments, but I'm all thumbs, unfortunately." Yuzu nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. It wasn't that big of a deal anyway. What kind of stories are you looking for out here, though? She said. You'd do better in the library. Probably, En said, shrugging. But... shh. She put one finger to her lips, and Yuzu fell silent. Her heart thumped in her ears. Was something wrong? She didn't hear anything. There was the water, of course, and the breeze in the trees, and the birds singing, the rustle of flowers in the brush as animals wriggled past them. Hear that? En said. Hear what? En's lips twitched into half a smile. The story, the one the forest is telling you. Can you hear it? Yuzu listened again, but nothing. She just heard the normal forest sounds. I don't think I get it. En smiled under her hood, and Yuzu wondered why she didn't just push it back from her face. Wasn't it hard to see? Was there a reason she was being so mysterious? It's a song, see? En said. The song of life. The breeze rustling the leaves makes their seeds fall to the ground. The seeds grow into more trees, or they're eaten up by animals so they can live to have another litter of children. The story continues. It's the story of life itself. You can always hear it if you just take a moment to listen. Yuzu felt some strange twisting in her heart, as though she felt like crying. It sounded so beautiful coming out of her mouth that she didn't know what to think. She lifted one hand to her heart and squeezed. You make it sound so beautiful, she said. Because it is. Isn't living beautiful? Isn't the world around you beautiful? The cycle of life keeps going, even after things disappear. Over and over. Nothing ever truly disappears. It just becomes something else. She sighed, head tilting back ever so slightly, but Yuzu still couldn't see her face. If I died, right now, even if the entire world forgot I existed, I would still exist in this world. My body might decay, but it would become the new life of a new, beautiful tree, and I would still be a part of that tree. That tree could be chopped down and built into a home, and I would be part of that home. And the memory of that home would remain with the children who grew up there, and I would be somewhere in that memory. And so I would continue on, forever, even if I was forgotten. Life is just a cycle of continuing, even when things disappear. Isn't that beautiful? Yuzu felt tears in her eyes for some reason. She rubbed them away. Yeah, she said. It is. She swallowed thickly. You have a really beautiful view of the world, she said. When En smiled next, there was something sad about it, even though Yuzu couldn't see her eyes. You find what keeps you going, she said, soft. What keeps me walking is the knowledge that, no matter how much the world changes, everything still remains a part of it. Everything is still the same pieces that built it from the beginning of time, just reconfigured into something else. If you realize that, you're never really alone. Yuzu wished she could understand why her heart was squeezing like this. It was like the woman's sadness was flowing into her as though it were her own. What made her so sad? Even her beautiful thoughts were tinged with it. En turned slightly towards the shrine then. Have you ever been inside? She said. It was such an abrupt change of subject that Yuzu had to stop, dizzy for a moment before she could respond. No, of course not, she said. That's where the sacred sword rests until the champion can lift it again. It's a sin to trespass the sacred place without the goddess's choice. En let out just the softest snort. Sacred sword, she said. It's only a hunk of metal, really. Not that special. She looked back at Yuzu then, and a faint smile danced over her cheeks. Don't give up yet, all right? She said. I think things will work out in the end. What are you talking about? But the woman just smiled and turned into the woods. Yuzu scrambled forward. Her fingers grasped for the edge of En's cloak. There was something important she wanted to say. She didn't know what it was, but she didn't want En to disappear yet. En, she started. and then her foot caught in a root and she yelped, tumbling face first into the dirt. She coughed up soil, pawing it from her face. But when she finally got herself to look up again, N had already vanished from sight completely, as though she'd never been there at all.